kind of been going back and forth with the night reads situation, and I'm figuring this out as I'm putting these videos up, so bear with me, join along for the ride, but I can't promise any one trajectory. And one of the main reasons, and I feel like this is just plainly obvious and kind of like comes through in every aspect of my life, is that I have ADHD, and you are seeing this with the way I am reading and choosing the books to read to, because I love the book I've been reading to so far. It is incredibly dense, but very interesting. But for the last 3 days, I've just had this internal itch to read this book. And that's kind of how I read books too. I sometimes, well, most of the time, don't really finish one book at a time. I start a book, and then I might get a little bit into it, and then I'll start another book, and then I'll come back to the first book, and then I'll start a third book, and then I'll come back to the second book, and then the first book. So I'm not going to apologize. That's just how my brain works, and this is my channel, so I'm sure you want to see one thing, but it's my channel, and I'm doing this for fun, so I'm going to do it however I like. So today I'm going to read this book that I have been honestly so excited to read in my night reads sessions. It is called Women Who Run with the Wolves. It is written by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and it was published, oh my god, so it was published in 1975, wait, was it? 1992, just kidding. This book was published in 1992, and then I think a reprint in 1995. An old friend gave me this book, someone I worked with in a cafe in Austin, and they gave me this book, and they gave me Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, which I actually haven't read yet, and I'm also dying to read that book, so hopefully I get to that book soon on this series. But today I wanted to read the introduction to this book and maybe get into a chapter. This book is incredibly powerful. It brought me a lot of comfort. I feel like for the last 6-7 years, I have been arcing into my current being as a wild woman. And through learning about not just what my position is in society today, but the journey that women have had, and also the journey of the world so far, and placing myself in that context, and also placing myself in my own story. I have transitioned, and that's just growing, right? But I would say, especially for the last 5 years, I have been really connecting to my heart in very profound ways that I was blocked from for a while before. And I use the word blocked kind of like I felt blocked, and I think the reason was there was a lot to discover internally, and I really had to journey down under and figure out things about myself that I knew but didn't know. I think also because of my adult role models that I have been looking up to, the main lesson that I had from them, and they are also wild women, is that at the end of the day, there are going to be expectations put on you from everyone. There are going to be expectations put on you from your family, from your siblings, from your partners, from your larger social groups, at your workplace, just everywhere. And while being part of the social fabric is important, because us as human beings, we're social beings, there is a liberation that gets stifled. And it is this very liberation that it's seen as wild, it's seen as uncontainable, it's seen as dangerous, it's seen as crazy, whatever you want to call it. And the closer you get to your heart and the closer you get to your soul, the more separate you start to feel from these social structures and these fabrics that are interwoven so deeply and so intricately. I'm starting to feel really emotional, but one of the reasons I recently took a trip to India, and being in India was incredibly difficult for me. I was returning after 10 years, and I have enjoyed a certain kind of freedom for the last 10 years, and it has been in the way I dress, or the things I do, or kind of being free of a lot of perception. And in many ways, and this is kind of counterintuitive because I'm literally working towards a YouTube channel, but in India, people who have known me since I was a kid met me again as an adult, and they have been watching me for a long time, but the last time they knew me was when I was blocked from these energies that now I have a lot of access to. And I think one of the reasons why it was so difficult for me is I could feel, and not only feel, I was told very blatantly, and I could hear a lot of the expectations that they had of me, from me. They want me to have a certain kind of job. They want me to be part of a certain career track. They want this, they want that. And no shame or not saying anything to people who choose those things in their lives. But once I have figured out and I have found a way to listen to my heart, it's really, really hard to put her back in a box and block her away. The reason I'm saying all this, and I really kind of got away from myself, is that in this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, it is talking about these women that are black sheep, that are considered crazy, that are considered wild, that are considered uncontrollable. And uncontrollable is considered dangerous because ultimately there is an archetype that wants control. And when we learn to honor ourselves, we learn to break out of that cycle of control, no matter what kind of control it might be. And that can be very concerning for the people who want that control. I will literally start from the first page with 3 like short reviews from other authors, and then I'll begin with the introduction. Dorothy Allison said, "My copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves came to me as a gift from one who not only knew me well but loved me well. You need this," she told me. When finally, far away from home and terribly worn down, I pulled the book out and dipped into it, I realized she was right. Estes gives story as sustenance, vital to the survival of the soul. What Clarissa Pinkola Estes has done is more than give us stories and parables by which we construct our stronger selves. She has given us a vision of life as a shared enterprise. The female heart, not just embattled, but vibrant and open to hope. It is a book I, too, give to those I love. I also, oh my god, why am I about to cry? Obviously, I'm Kali, and Kali is a wild woman, and at the core of the wild woman, I think, and this is one of the reasons, like, on my YouTube, I, like, talk so much about Raki Samanth. Raki Samanth is a wild woman, and wild women are seen and talked about in a negative light because people aren't able to understand these women. And I think only other wild women can see wild women and understand wild women and love wild women. I think I just want to stop creating sentences because I'm literally losing myself. My brain is going so fast, and I've felt this energy of feeling misunderstood a lot in my life, and it's incredibly alienating, and it's incredibly lonely, and you know, of course, like, and I know this to be true as well, that no one is going to understand you the way you understand yourself. But when you really truly start to understand yourself, people aren't going to know you even more. And I have felt like a black sheep many times in my life in many different situations. And obviously in those situations I was just at the wrong place. I was not around the kind of people that would meet me with open arms. And also at the same time, I have been around people that have met me with open arms, and I have created and I have such fulfilling, loving friendships and relationships, and such beautiful people around me. And so I'm not victimizing myself in any way or saying that, like, oh, like, I've never felt understood, because I have. But it's also by the people who have met themselves so deeply that they are able to meet other people as deeply as they have met themselves. And I think the wild woman is just, it's every woman. It's every human being. We are wild beings. And our taming is the burden of the civilizations that we live in. And it's so easy to be brought down and weighed down by them. And so reading this book is really freeing in the way that you feel like you are allowed to tap into who you truly are at your core, and why maybe you might have felt alienated in certain situations and so accepted in others. There is a lot of power to this lore, and I think I have also been part of cycles where, because I've had to keep certain energies trapped so far deep within me, they come out bursting and they come out erupting. And I think anytime words like that are used, it's not a very healthy way of expression. And this book and Clarissa Pinkola Estes' writing also brought me a lot of comfort and really helped me heal parts of my living experience that I've held on to for a long time. I was finally able to let go. This is a book I would recommend every human being to read, but especially every single woman alive. I'd heard, someone had told me that they had to read this book in school, and I wish the schools had just kept this book in the curriculum forever, because it is so empowering to young women to be able to listen to the rhythm of their hearts and the rhythm of their souls and make a beautiful melody from them. I am so passionate about this book. I'm gonna get started. So I think I'm gonna go through the introduction. It is kind of a long one, so I think this video will just be the introduction. Wildlife and the wild woman are both endangered species. Over time, we have seen the feminine instinctive nature looted, driven back, and overbuilt. For long periods, it has been mismanaged like the wildlife and the wildlands. For several thousand years, as soon as often as we turn our backs, it is relegated to the poorest land in the psyche. The spiritual lands of wild women have, throughout history, been plundered or burnt, dens bulldozed, and natural cycles forced into unnatural rhythms to please others. It is not by accident that the pristine wilderness of our planet disappears, as the understanding of our own inner wild natures fades. It is not so difficult to comprehend why old forests and old women are viewed as not very important resources. It is not such a mystery. It is not so coincidental that wolves and coyotes, bears and wildish women have similar reputations. They all share related instinctual archetypes, and as such, both are erroneously reputed to be ingracious, holy, and innately dangerous and ravenous. My life and work as a Jungian psychoanalyst, poet, and cantadora, keeper of the old stories, have taught me that women's flaging vitality can be restored by extensive psychic archaeological digs into the ruins of the female underworld. By these methods, we are able to recover the ways of the natural instinctive psyche, and through its personification in the wild woman archetype, we are able to discern the ways and means of women's deepest nature. The modern woman is a blur of activity. She is pressured to be all things to all people. The old knowing is long overdue. The title of this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype, came from my study of wildlife biology, wolves in particular. The studies of the wolves, Canis lupus and Canis rufus, are like the history of women regarding both their spiritedness and their travails. Healthy wolves and healthy women share certain psychic characteristics: keen sensing, playful spirit, and a heightened capacity for devotion. Wolves and women are relational by nature, inquiring, possessed of great endurance and strength. They are deeply intuitive, intensely concerned with their young, their mates, and their pack. They are experienced in adapting to constantly changing circumstances. They are fiercely stalwart and very brave. Yet, both have been hounded, harassed, and falsely imputed to be devouring and divicious, overly aggressive, of less value than those who are their detractors. They have been the targets of those who would clean up the wilds as well as the wildish environs of the psyche, extincting the instinctual, and leaving no trace of it behind. The predation of wolves and women by those who misunderstand them is strikingly similar. So that is where the concept of the wild woman archetype first crystallized for me, in the study of wolves. I've studied other creatures as well, such as bear, elephant, and the soul birds, butterflies. The characteristics of each species give abundant metaphoric hints into what is knowable about the feminine instinctual psyche. The wild nature passed through my spirit twice, once by my birth to a passionate Mexican-Spanish bloodline, and later through adoption by a family of fiery Hungarians. I was raised up near the Michigan state line, surrounded by woodlands, orchards, and farmland, and near the Great Lakes. There, thunder and lightning were my main nutrition. Cornfields creaked and spoke aloud at night. Far up in the north, wolves came to the clearings in moonlight, prancing and praying. We could all drink from the same streams without fear. Although I did not call her by that name then, my love for wild woman began when I was a little child. I was an aesthete. I was an aesthete rather than an athlete, and my only wish was to be an ecstatic wanderer. Rather than chairs and tables, I preferred the ground, trees, and caves, for in those places I felt I could lean against the cheek of God. The river always called to be visited after dark. The fields needed to be walked in so they could make their rustle talk. Fires needed to be built in the forest at night, and stories needed to be told outside the hearing of grown-ups. I was lucky to be brought up in nature. There, lightning strikes taught me about sudden death and the evanescence of life. Mice litters showed that death was softened by new life. When I was unearthed, Indian beads, fossils from the loam. When I unearthed Indian beads, fossils from the loam, I understood that humans have been there a long, long time. I learned about the sacred art of self-decoration with monarch butterflies perched atop my head, lightning bugs as my night jewelry, and emerald green frogs as bracelets. A wolf mother killed one of her mortally injured pups. This taught a hard compassion and the necessity of allowing death to come to the dying. The fuzzy caterpillars which fell from their branches and crawled back up again taught simple-mindedness. Their tickle walking on my arm taught how skin can come alive. Climbing to the tops of trees taught what sex would someday feel like. My own post-World War II generation grew up in a time when women were infantilized and treated as property. They were kept as fallow gardens. But thankfully, there was always wild seed which arrived on the wind. Though what they wrote was unauthorized, women blazed away anyway. Though what they painted went unrecognized, it fed the soul anyway. Women had to beg for the instruments and the spaces needed for their arts, and if none were forthcoming, they made space in trees, caves, woods, and closets. Dancing was barely tolerated, if at all, so they danced in the forest when no one could see them, or in the basement, or on the way out to empty the trash. Self-decoration caused suspicion. Joyful body or dress increased the danger of being harmed or sexually assaulted. The very clothes on one's shoulders could not be called one's own. It was a time when parents who abused their children were simply called strict, when the spiritual lacerations of profoundly exploited women were referred to as nervous breakdowns, when girls and women who were tightly girdled, tightly reined, and tightly muzzled were called nice, and those other females who managed to slip the collar for a moment or two of life were branded bad. So, like many women before and after me, I lived my life as a disguised criatura. Like my kith and kin before me, I staggered in high heels, and I wore a dress and a hat to church. But my fabulous tail often fell below my hemline, and my ears twitched until my hat pitched, at the very least, down over both my eyes, and sometimes clear across the room. I've not forgotten the song of those dark years. Hambre del alma, the song of the starved soul. But neither have I forgotten the joyous canto hondo, the deep song, the words of which come back to us when we do the work of soulful reclamation. Like a trail through a forest which becomes more and more faint and finally seems to diminish to a nothing, traditional psychological theory, too, soon runs out for the creative, the gifted, the deep woman. Traditional psychology is often spare or entirely silent about deeper issues important to women. The archetypal, the intuitive, the sexual and cyclical, the ages of women, a woman's way, a woman's knowing. Like a trail through a forest which becomes more and more faint and finally seems to diminish to a nothing. Traditional psychological theory, too, soon runs out for the creative, the gifted, the deep woman. Traditional psychology is often spare or entirely silent about deeper issues important to women. The archetypal, the intuitive, the sexual and cyclical, the ages of women, a woman's way, a woman's knowing, her creative fire. This is what has driven my work on the wild woman archetype for over 2 decades. A woman's issues of soul cannot be treated by carving her into a more acceptable form as defined by an unconscious culture, nor can she be bent into a more intellectually acceptable shape by those who claim to be the soul bearers of consciousness. No, that is what has already caused millions of women who began as strong and natural powers to become outsiders in their own cultures. Instead, the goal must be the retrieval and succor of women's beauteous and natural psychic forms. Fairy tales, myths, and stories provide understandings which sharpen our sight so that we can pick out and pick up the path left by the wildish nature. The instruction found in story reassures us that the path has not run out, but still leads women deeper and more deeply still into their own knowing. The tracks we all are following are those of the wild and innate instinctual self. I call her wild woman for those very words, wild and woman. Create Lamar o tocar a la puerta, the fairy tale knock at the door of the deep female psyche. Lamar o tocar a la puerta means literally to play upon the instrument of the name in order to open a door. It means using words that summon up the opening of a passageway. No matter by which culture a woman is influenced, she understands the words wild and woman instinctively. When women hear those words, an old memory is stirred and brought back to life. The memory is of our absolute, undeniable, and irrevocable kinship with the wild feminine. A relationship which may have become ghosty from neglect, buried by over-domestication, outlawed by the surrounding culture, or no longer understood anymore. We may have forgotten her names, we may not answer when she calls ours, but in our bones we know her, we yearn toward her. We know she belongs to us, and we to her. It is into this fundamental, elemental, and essential relationship that we were born, and that in our essence we are also derived from. The wild woman archetype sheathes the alpha matrilineal being. There are times when we experience her, even if only fleetingly, and it makes us mad with wanting to continue. For some women, this vitalizing taste of the wild comes during pregnancy, during nursing their young, during the miracle of change in oneself as one raises a child, during attending to a love relationship as one would attend to a beloved garden. A sense of her also comes through the vision, through sights of great beauty. I have felt her when I see what we call in the woodlands a Jesus God sunset. I have felt her move in me from seeing the fishermen come up from the lake at dusk with lanterns lit, and also from seeing my newborn baby's toes all lined up like a row of sweet corn. We see her when we see her, which is everywhere. She comes to us through sound as well, through music which vibrates the sternum, excites the heart. It comes through the drum, the whistle, the call, and the cry. It comes through the written and the spoken word. Sometimes a word, a sentence, or a poem, or a story is so resonant, so right, it causes us to remember, at least for an instant, what substance we are really made from, and where is our true home. These transient tastes of the wild come during the mystique of inspiration. Ah, there it is. Oh, now it has gone. The longing for her comes when one happens across someone who has secured this wildish relationship. The longing comes when one realizes one has given scant time to the mystic cook fire, or to the dream time, too little time to one's own creative life, one's life work, or one's true loves. Yet, it is these fleeting tastes which come both through beauty as well as loss that cause us to become so bereft, so agitated, so longing that we eventually must pursue the wildish nature. Then we leap into the forest or into the desert or into the snow and run hard, our eyes scanning the ground, our hearing sharply tuned, searching under, searching over, searching for a a remnant, a sign that she still lives, that we have not lost our chance. And when we pick up her trail, it is typical of women to ride hard to catch up, to clear off the desk, clear off the relationship, clear out one's mind, turn to a new page, insist on a break the rules, stop the world, for we are not going on without her any longer. Once women have lost her and then found her again, they will contend to keep her for good. Once they have regained her, they will fight and fight hard to keep her. For with her, their creative lives blossom, their relationships gain meaning and depth and health. Their cycles of sexuality, creativity, work, and play are reestablished. They are no longer marks for the predation of others. They are entitled equally under the laws of nature to grow and to thrive. Now, their end of the day fatigue comes from satisfying work and endeavors, not from being shut up in too small a mindset, job, or relationship. They know instinctively when things must die and when things must live. They know how to walk away, and they know how to stay. When women reassert their relationship with the wildish nature, they are gifted with a permanent and internal watcher, a knower, a visionary, an oracle, an inspiratrix, an intuitive, a maker, a creator, an inventor, and a listener who guide, suggest, and urge vibrant life in the inner and outer worlds. When women are close to this nature, the fact of that relationship glows through them. This wild teacher, wild mother, wild mentor supports their inner and outer lives no matter what. So the word wild here is not used in its modern pejorative sense, meaning out of control, but in its original sense, which means to live a natural life, one in which the creature, has innate integrity and healthy boundaries. These words, wild and woman, cause women to remember who they are and what they are about. They create a metaphor to describe the force which funds all females. They personify a force that women cannot live without. The wild woman archetype can be expressed in other terms which are equally apt. You can call this powerful psychological nature the instinctive nature, but wild woman is the force which lies behind that. You can call it the natural psyche, but the archetype of the wild woman stands behind that as well. You can call it the innate, the basic nature of women. You can call it the indigenous, the intrinsic nature of women. In poetry, it might be called the other, or the seven oceans of the universe, or the far woods, or the friend. In various psychologies and from various perspectives, it would perhaps be called the ID, the self, the medial nature. In biology, it would be called the typical or fundamental nature. But because it is tacit, prescient, and visceral among cantadoras, it is called the wise or knowing nature. It is sometimes called the woman who lives at the end of time, or the woman who lives at the edge of the world. And this criatura is always a creator hag, or a death goddess, or a maiden in descent, or any number of other personifications. She is both friend and mother to all those who have lost their way, all those who need a learning, all those who have a riddle to solve, all those out in the forest or the desert, wandering and searching. In actuality, in the psychoid unconscious, an ineffable layer of psyche from which this phenomena emanates, wild woman has no name, for she is so vast. But since this force engenders every important facet of womanliness here on earth, she is named many names, not only in order to peer into the myriad aspects of her nature, but also to hold on to her, because in the beginning of retrieving our relationship with her, she can turn to smoke in an instant. By naming her, we create for her a territory of thought and feeling within us. Then she will come, and if valued, she will stay. So in Spanish, I call her Rio Abajo Rio, the river beneath the river, La Mujer Grande, the great woman, Luz del Abismo, the light from the abyss, La Loba, the wolf woman, or La Huesera, the bone woman. She is called in Hungarian O Erdoben, she of the woods, and Rosomak, the wolverine. In Navajo, she is Naashji Astaza, the spider woman, who weaves the fate of humans and animals and plants and rocks. In Guatemala, among many other names, she is Humana del Niebla, the mist being, the woman who has lived forever. In Japanese, she is Amaterasu Omikami, the Numina, who brings all light, all consciousness. In Tibet, she is called Dakini, the dancing force which produces clear seeing within women, and it goes on. She goes on. The comprehension of this wild woman nature is not a religion, but a practice. It is a psychology in its truest sense, psych meaning soul, and ology or logos, a knowing of the soul. Without her, women are without ears to hear her soul talk or to register the chiming of their own rhythms. Without her, women's inner eyes are closed by some shadowy hand, and large parts of their days are spent in a semi-paralyzing ennui or else wishful thinking. Without her, women lose the sureness of their soul footing. Without her, they forget why they're here. They hold on when they would best hold out. Without her, they take too much or too little or nothing at all. Without her, they are silent when they are in fact on fire. She is their regulator. She is their soulful heart, the same as the human heart that regulates the physical body. When we lose touch with the instinctive psyche, we live in a semi-destroyed state, and images and powers that are natural to the feminine are not allowed full development. When a woman is cut away from her basic source, she is sanitized, and her instincts and natural life cycles are lost, subsumed by the culture, or by the intellect or the ego, one's own or those belonging to others. Wild woman is the health of all women. Without her, women's psychology makes no sense. This wilder woman is the prototypical woman. No matter what culture, no matter what era, no matter what politic, she does not change. Her cycles change. Her symbolic representations change. But in essence, she does not change. She is what she is, and she is whole. She canalizes through women. If they are suppressed, she struggles upward. If women are free, she is free. Fortunately, no matter how many times she is pushed down, she bounds up again. No matter how many times she is forbidden, quelled, cut back, diluted, tortured, touted as unsafe, dangerous, mad, and other derogations, she emanates upwards in women, so that even the most quiet, even the most restrained woman keeps a secret place for her. Even the most repressed woman has a secret life with secret thoughts and secret feelings that are lush and wild. That is natural. Even the most captured woman guards the place of the wildish self, for she knows intuitively that someday there will be a loophole, an aperture, a chance, and she will hightail it to escape. I believe that all women and men are born gifted. However, and truly, there has been little to describe the psychological lives and ways of gifted women, talented women, creative women. There is, on the other hand, much writ about the weakness and foibles of humans in general and women in particular. But in the case of the wild woman archetype, in order to fathom her, apprehend her, utilize her offerings, we must be more interested in the thoughts, feelings, and endeavors which strengthen women and adequately count the interior and cultural factors which weaken women. In general, when we understand the wildish nature as a being in its own right, one which animates and informs a woman's deepest life, then we can begin to develop in ways never thought possible. A psychology which fails to address this innate spiritual being at the center of feminine psychology fails women and fails their daughters and their daughters' daughters far into all future matrilineal lines. So in order to apply a good medicine to the hurt parts of the wildish psyche, in order to a right relationship to the archetype of the wild woman, one has to name the disarrays of the psyche accurately. While in my clinical profession we do have a good diagnostic statistical manual and a godly amount of differential diagnoses, as well as psychoanalytic parameters which define psychopathy through the organization or lack of it in the objective psyche or the ego-self axis. There are yet other defining behaviors and feelings which, from a woman's frame of reference, powerfully describe what is the matter. What are some of the feeling-toned symptoms of a disrupted relationship with the wildish force in the psyche? To chronically feel, think, or act in any of the following ways is to have partially severed or lost entirely the relationship with the deep, instinctual psyche. Using women's language exclusively, these are feeling extraordinarily dry, fatigued, frail, depressed, confused, gagged, muzzled, unaroused, feeling frightened, halt, or weak, without inspiration, without animation, without soulfulness, without meaning, shame-bearing, chronically fuming, volatile, stuck, uncreative, compressed, crazed, feeling powerless, chronically doubtful, shaky, blocked, unable to follow through, giving one's creative life over to others, life-sapping choices in mates, work, or friendships, suffering to live outside one's own cycles, overprotective of self, inert, uncertain, faltering, inability to pace oneself or set limits, not insistent on one's own tempo, to be self-conscious, to be away from one's god or gods, to be separated from one's revivification, drawn far into domesticity, intellectualism, work, or inertia, because that is the safest place for one who has lost her instincts. To fear to venture by oneself or to reveal oneself, fear to seek mentor, mother, father, fear to set out one's imperfect work before it is an opus, fear to set out on a journey, fear of caring for another or others, fear one will run on, run out, run down, cringing before authority, loss of energy before creative projects, wincing, humiliation, angst, numbness, anxiety. Afraid to bite back when there is nothing else left to do. Afraid to try the new. Fear to stand up to. Afraid to speak up. Speak against. Sick stomach. Butterflies. Sour stomach. Cut in the middle. Strangled. Becoming conciliatory or nice too easily. Revenge. Afraid to stop. Afraid to act. Repeatedly counting to 3 and not beginning. Superiority complex. Ambivalence. And yet otherwise fully capable and functioning. These severances are a disease not of an era or a century, but become an epidemic anywhere and any time women are captured, any time the wildish nature has become entrapped. A healthy woman is much like a wolf, robust, chock-full, strong life force, life-giving, territorially aware, inventive, loyal, roving. Yet, separation from the wildish nature causes a woman's personality to become meager, thin, ghosty, spectral. We are not meant to be puny with frail hair and inability to leap up, inability to chase, to birth, to create a life. When women's lives are in stasis or filled with ennui, there's always time for the wildish woman to emerge. There's time for the creative function of the psyche to flood to the delta. Hi, Bindi. Hi, Bindi. Are you here to listen to me read? Yeah. When Bindi was a baby and I just brought her home, she had just been spayed, so she was in a lot of pain and she didn't know who I was. And so I kept her in the bathroom for a little while, because when you bring cats home for the first time, you're supposed to keep them in smaller rooms. And so I would go in there and hang out with her, and we'd just sit there for hours, and I would read to her. And slowly but surely, she started coming out from behind the toilet, and our first moment of getting to know each other is we started passing the ball back and forth, and I would pass it to her, and she would pass it back to me. But me reading out loud is so familiar to her that every time I read, she loves it, and she wants to hang out, and she wants to come sit with me. So thank you for being here, Bindi. How does Wild Woman affect women? With her as ally, as leader, model, teacher, we see, not through 2 eyes, but through the eyes of intuition, which is many-eyed. When we assert intuition, we are therefore like the starry night. We gaze at the world through 1,000 eyes. The wild nature carries the bundles for healing. She carries everything a woman needs to be and know.
She carries the medicine for all things. She carries stories and dreams and words and songs and signs and symbols. She is both vehicle and destination. To join the instinctual nature does not mean to come undone, change everything from left to right, from black to white, to move the east to west, to act crazy or out of control. It does not mean to lose one's primary socializations or to become less human. It means quite the opposite. The wild nature has a vast integrity to it. It means to establish territory, to find one's pack, to be in one's body with certainty and pride, regardless of the body's gifts and limitations, to speak and act in one's behalf, to be aware, alert, to draw on the innate feminine powers of intuition and sensing, to come into one's cycles, to find what one belongs to rise with dignity, to retain as much consciousness as possible.
The archetype of the wild woman and all that stands behind her is patroness to all painters, writers, sculptors, dancers, thinkers, prayer makers, seekers, finders. For they are all busy with the work of invention, and that is the instinctive nature. That is the instinctive nature's main occupation. As in all art, she resides in the guts, not in the head. She can track and run and summon and repel. She can sense, camouflage, and love deeply. She is intuitive, typical, and normative. She is utterly essential to women's mental and soul health. So what compromises the wild woman? From the viewpoint of archetypal psychology, as well as in ancient traditions, she is the female soul. And yet she is more. She is the source of the feminine. She is all that is of instinct, of the worlds both seen and hidden. She is the basis. We each receive from her a glowing cell which contains all the instincts and knowings needed for our lives. She is the life, death, life force. She is the incubator. She is intuition. She is far seer. She is deep listener. She is loyal heart. She encourages humans to remain multilingual, fluent in the languages of dreams, passion, and poetry. She whispers from night dreams. She leaves behind on the terrain of a woman's soul a coarse hair and muddy footprints. These fill women with longing to find her, free her, and love her. She is ideas, feelings, urges, and memory. She has been lost and half forgotten for a long, long time. She is the source, the light, the dark, the daybreak. She is the smell of good mud and the back leg of the fox. The birds which tell us secrets belong to her. She is the voice that says, "This way, this way." She is the one who thunders after injustice. She is the one who turns like a great wheel. She is the maker of cycles. She is the one we leave home to look for. She is the one we come home to. She is the mucky root of all women. She is the things that keep us going when we think we're done for. She is the incubator of raw little ideas and deals. She is the mind which thinks us. We are the thoughts that she thinks. Where is she present? Where can you feel her? Where can you find her? She walks the deserts, woods, oceans, cities, in the barrios and in castles. She lives among queens, among campesinas, in the boardroom, in the factory, in the prison, in the mountain of solitude. She lives in the ghetto, at the university, and in the streets. She leaves footprints for us to try for size. She leaves footprints wherever there is one woman who is fertile soil. Where does she live? At the bottom of the well, in the headwaters, in the ether before time. She lives in the tear and in the ocean. She lives in the tear and in the ocean. She lives in the cambia of trees, which pings at as it grows. She is from the future and from the beginning of time. She lives in the past and is summoned by us. She is in the present and keeps a chair at our table, stands behind us in line, and drives ahead of us on the road. She is in the future and walks backward in time to find us now. She lives in the green poking through snow. She lives in the rustling stalks of dying autumn corn. She lives where the dead come to be kissed and the living send their prayers. She lives in the place where language is made. She lives on poetry and percussion and singing. She lives on quarter notes and grace notes and in a cantana, in a sestina, and in the blues. She is the moment just before inspiration bursts upon us. She lives in a faraway place that breaks through to our world. People may ask for evidence, for proof of her existence. They are essentially asking for proof of the psyche. Since we are the psyche, we are also the evidence. Each and every one of us is the evidence of not only wild woman's existence, but of her condition in the collective. We are the proof of this ineffable female Newman. Our existence parallels hers. Our experiences of her within and without are the proofs. Our thousands and millions of encounters with her intrapsychically, through our night dreams and our day thoughts, through our yearnings and inspirations. These are the verifications. The fact that we are bereft in her absence, though we long and yearn when we are separated from her. These are the manifestations that she has passed this way. My doctorate is in ethnoclinical psychology, which is the study of both clinical psychology and ethnology, the latter emphasizing the study of the psychology of groups and tribes in particular. My postdoctoral diploma is in analytical psychology, which is what certifies me as a Jungian psychologist. My life experience as cantadora, mesemondo, poet, and artist informs my work with analyses equally. Sometimes I am asked to tell what I do in my consulting room to help women return to their wildish natures. I place substantial emphasis on clinical and developmental psychology, and I use the simplest and most accessible ingredient for healing: stories. We follow the patient's dream material, which contains many plots and stories. The analysis, physical sensations, and body. The analysis, physical sensations, and body memories are also stories which can be read and rendered into consciousness. Additionally, I teach a form of powerful interactive trancing that is proximate to Jung's active imagination, and this also produces stories which further elucidate the client's psychic journey. We elicit the wildish self through specific questions, and through examining tales, legends, and mythos. Most times we are able, over time, to find the guiding myth or fairy tale that contains all the instruction a woman needs to her current psychic development. These stories comprise a woman's soul drama. It is like a play with stage instructions, characterization, and props. The craft of making is an important part of the work I do. I seek to empower my clients by teaching them the age-old crafts of the hands, among them the symbolic arts of talisman making, las ofrendas, and retablos, these being anything from simple ribbon sticks to elaborate sculpture. Art is important for it commemorates the seasons of the soul, or a special or tragic event in the soul's journey. Art is not just for oneself, not just a marker of one's own understanding. It is also a map for those who follow after us. As you might imagine, work with each person is customized in the extreme, for it is true that people are made one to a kind. But these factors remain constant in my work with people, and these are the fundament of all humans' work before them today, my own work as well as yours. The craft of questions, the craft of stories, the craft of the hands, all these are the making of something, and that something is soul. Anytime we feed soul, it guarantees increase. I hope you will see that these are tangible ways to soften old scar tissue, balm old wounds, and envision anew, thereby restoring the old skills that make the soul visible in down-to-earth ways. The tales I bring here to elucidate the instinctual nature of women are in some cases original stories, and in other cases are distinct literary renderings that I have written based on those peculiar ones given into my keeping by my tías y tíos, abuelitas y abuelos, omas and opas, the old ones of my family, those whose oral traditions have been unbroken for as far back as we can remember. A few are written documents of my own first-hand encounters, some from long time passing, and all from the heart. They are presented in all faithful detail and archetypal integrity. It is with the permission and blessing of 3 living generations of familial healer-tellers who understand the subtleties and requirements of story as healing phenomena that I carry these forward. Additionally, here are some of the questions I pose to my analysans and others to whom I offer counsel in order for them to remember themselves. I also detail for you some of the craft, the experiential and artful play that assists women in retaining the noumen of their work in conscious memory. All these help to bring about convergence with the precious, wildish self. Stories are medicine. I have been taken with stories since I heard my first. They have such power. They do not require that we do, be, act, anything. We need only listen. The remedies for repair or reclamation of any lost psychic drive are contained in stories. Stories engender the excitement, sadness, questions, longings, and understandings that spontaneously bring the archetype, in this case, wild woman, back to the surface. Stories are embedded with instructions which guide us about the complexities of life. Stories enable us to understand the need for and the ways to raise a submerged archetype. The stories on the following pages are the ones out of hundreds that I've worked with and pored over for decades, and that I believe most clearly express the bounty of the wild woman archetype. Sometimes various cultural overlays disarray the bones of stories. For instance, in the case of the brothers Grimm, among other fairy tale collectors of the past few centuries, there is strong suspicion that the informants of that time sometimes purified their stories for the religious brothers' sakes. Over the course of time, old pagan symbols were overlaid with Christian ones, so that an old healer in a tale became an evil witch, a spirit became an angel, an initiation veil or caul became a handkerchief, or a child named Beautiful. The customary name for a child born during solstice festival was renamed Schmerzenreich, sorrowful. Sexual elements were omitted. Helping creatures and animals were often changed into demons and boogies. This is how many women's teaching tales about sex, love, money, marriage, birthing, death, and transformation were lost. It is how fairy tales and myths that explicate ancient women's mysteries have been covered over too. Most old collections of fairy tales and mythos existent today have been scoured clean of the scatological, the sexual, the perverse, as in warnings against the pre-Christian, the feminine, the goddesses, the initiatory, the medicines for various psychological malices, and the directions for spiritual raptures. But they are not lost forever. I was given as a child many of what I know to be unvarnished and uncorrupted themes of the stories of Eld, many of which I bring to this work. But even story fragments, as they exist today, can foreshadow the shape of the entire story. I've poked about in what I playfully call fairy tale forensics and paleomythology, even though, as its heart, reconstruction is a long, intricate, and contemplative endeavor. When such would be effective, I use various forms of exegesis, comparing leitmotifs, taking anthropological and historical inferences into account in forms both new and old. This method, in part, reconstructs from ancient archetypal patternings learned through my years of training in analytical and archetypal psychology, which preserve and study all the motives and plots in fairy tales, legends, and mythos in order to apprehend the instinctual lives of humans. I gain and assist from templates that lie in the imaginal worlds, the collective images of the unconscious, and those drawn up through dreams and non-ordinary states of consciousness. A final polish might be gained by comparing the story matrices with archaeological evidence from the ancient cultures themselves, such as ritual poetry, masks, and figurines. Simply put, in fairy tale locution, I spend much time raking the ashes with my nose. I have been studying archetypal patterns for some 25 years, and myths, fairy tales, and folklore from my familial cultures for twice as long. I have learned a vast body of knowledge about the bones of stories and know when and where the bones are missing in a story. Through the centuries, various conquests of nations by other nations, and both peaceful and forced religious conversions have covered over or altered the original core of old stories. But there is good news. For all the structural tumbledown in existing versions of tales, there is a strong pattern that still shines forth. From the form and shape of the pieces and parts, it can be determined with good accuracy what has been lost from the story, and those missing pieces can be redrawn accurately, often revealing amazing understructures which begin to heal women's sadness that so much of the old mysteries has been destroyed. It is not quite so. They have not been destroyed. All one might need, all that we might ever need, is still whispering from the bones of story. Collecting the essence of stories is a constant paleontologic endeavor. The more story bones, the more likely the integral structure can be found. The more whole the stories,
the more subtle twists and turns of the psyche are presented to us, and the better opportunity we have to apprehend and evoke our soul work. When we work the soul, she, the wild woman, creates more of herself. As a child, I was lucky to be surrounded by people from many of the old European countries and Mexico. Many members of my family, my neighbors and friends had recently arrived from Hungary, Germany, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Serbo-Croatia, Russia, Lithuania, and Bohemia, as well as Jalisco, Michoacán, Juárez, and many of the aldeas fronterias, villages at the Mexico-Texas-Arizona borders. They, and many others, Native Americans, people from Appalachia, Asian immigrants, and many African American families from the South came to farm, to pick, to work in the ash pits and steel mills, the breweries, and in domestic jobs. Most were not educated in the academic sense, yet they were intensely wise. They were the bearers of a valuable and almost pure oral tradition. Many of my family and neighboring people who surrounded me had survived forced labor camps, displaced person camps, deportation camps, and concentration camps, where the storytellers among them had lived a nightmare version of Scheherazade. Many had had their family lands taken, had lived in immigration jails, had been repatriated against their wills. From these rustic storytellers, I first learned the tales people tell when life may turn to death, and death may turn to life at any moment. Because their transmissions to me were so filled with suffering and with hope, when I later grew old enough to read fairy stories printed in books, the latter seemed curiously starched and ironed flat in comparison. As a young adult, I migrated west towards the Continental Divide. I lived amidst loving Jewish, Irish, Greek, Italian, Afro-American, and Alsatian strangers, who became kindred spirits and friends. I've been blessed to know some of the rare and old Latino communities from the southwestern USA, such as Trampas and Trucas, New Mexico. I was fortunate to spend time with Native American friends and relatives, from the Inuit in the north through the Pueblo and Plains peoples in the west, to the Nahuas, Lacandones, Tehuanas, Huicholes, Siris, Maya Quiches, Maya Caquiqueles, Mezquitos, Cunas, Nazca Quechas, and Jivaros in Central and South America. I've traded stories with sister and brother healers at kitchen tables and under grape arbors, in hen houses and dairy barns, and while patting tortillas, tracking wildfire, and sewing the millionth cross-stitch. I've been lucky to share the last bowl of chili, to sing with gospel women so as to raise the dead, and to sleep under stars in houses without roofs. I've sat down to the fire or dinner or both in Little Italy, Polish Town, the Hill Country, Los Barrios, and other ethnic communities through the urban Midwest and Far West, and most recently traded stories about sparats, bad ghosts, with Mangria friends in the Bahamas.
I have been double lucky that wherever I've gone, the children, the matrons, the men in their prime, and the old coots and crones, the soul artists, have crept out of the woods, jungles, meadows, and sandhills to regale me with caws and cavils, and I too, to them. There are many ways to approach stories. The professional folklorist, the Jungian, Freudian, or other sort of analyst, the ethnologist, anthropologist, theologian, archaeologist, each has a different method, both in collecting tales and the use to which they are put. Intellectually, the way I developed my work with stories was through my training in analytical and archetypal psychology. For more than half a decade during my psychoanalytic education, I studied amplification of leitmotifs, archetypal symbology, world mythology, ancient and popular iconology, ancient and popular iconology, ethnology, world religions, and interpretation. Viscerally, however, I come to stories as a cantadora, keeper of the old stories. I come from a long line of storytellers, misimondok, old Hungarian women who might as easily tell while sitting on wooden chairs with their plastic pocketbooks on their laps, their knees apart, their skirts touching the ground, or while wringing the neck of a chicken. Encuentistas, old Latina women who stand, robust of breast, hips wide, and cry out the story ranchera style. Both clans storytell in the plain voice of women who have lived blood and babies, bread and bones. For us, story is a medicine which strengthens and arights the individual and the community. Those who have taken on the responsibilities of this craft and are committed to the Newman behind the craft are direct descendants of an immense and ancient community of holy people, troubadours, bards, griots, cantadoras, cantors, traveling poets, bums, hags, and crazy people. I once dreamt I was telling stories and felt someone patting my foot in encouragement. I looked down and I saw that I was standing on the shoulders of an old woman who was studying my ankles. I once dreamt I was telling stories and felt someone patting my foot in encouragement. I looked down and I saw that I was standing on the shoulders of an old woman who was steadying my ankles and smiling up at me. I said to her, "No, come stand on my shoulders, for you are old and I am young." No, she insisted. This is the way it is supposed to be. I saw that she stood on the shoulders of a woman far older than she, who stood on the shoulders of a woman even older, who stood on the shoulders of a woman in robes, who stood on the shoulders of another soul, who stood on the shoulders ... I believed the old dream woman about the way it was supposed to be. The nurture for telling stories comes from the might and endowments of my people who have gone before me. In my experience, the telling moment of the story draws its power from a towering column of humanity, joined one to the other across time and space, elaborately dressed in the rags and robes or nakedness of their time, and filled to the bursting with life still being lived. If there is a single source of story and the Newman of story, this long chain of humans is it. Story is far older than the art and science of psychology. and will always be the elder in the equation no matter how much time passes. One of the oldest ways of telling, which intrigues me greatly, is the passionate trance state, wherein the teller senses the audience, be it an audience of one or of many, and then enters a state in the world between worlds, where a story is attracted to the trance teller and told through her. The trance teller calls on El Duende, the wind that blows soul into the faces of listeners. A trance teller learns to be psychically double-jointed through the meditative practice of story. That is, training oneself to undo certain psychic gates and ego apertures in order to let the voice speak. The voice that is older than the stones. When this is done, the story may take any trail, be turned upside down, be filled with porridge and dumped out for a poor person's feast, be filled with gold for the taking, or chase the listener into the next world. The teller never knows how it will all come out, and that is at least half of the moist magic of story. This is a book of tellings about the ways of the wild woman archetype. To try to diagram her, to draw boxes around her psychic life, would be contrary to her spirit. To know her is an ongoing process, a lifelong process. And that is why this work is an ongoing work, a lifelong work. So here are some stories to apply to yourself as soul vitamins, some observations, some map fragments, some little pieces of pine pitch for fastening feathers to trees to show the way, and some flattened underbrush to guide the way back to El Mundo Subterráneo. El Mundo Subterráneo, the underground world, our psychic home. Stories set the inner life into motion, and this is particularly important where the inner life is frightened, wedged, or cornered. Story greases the hoists and pulleys. It causes adrenaline to surge, shows us the way out, down, or up, and for our trouble, cuts for us fine, wide doors in previously blank walls. Openings that lead to the dreamland, that lead to love and learning, that lead us back to our own real lives as knowing, wildish women. Stories like Bluebird bring us news of just what to do about the women's wound that will not cease its bleeding. Stories like Skeleton Woman demonstrate the mystical power of relationship and how deadened feeling can return to life and deep loving once again. The gifts of Old Mother Death are to be found in the character of Baba Yaga, the old wild hag. The little doll who shows the way when all seems lost raises one of the lost womanly and instinctual arts to the surface again in Vasalia the Wise. Stories like La Loba, a bone woman in the desert, teach about the transformative function of the psyche. The handless maiden recovers the lost stages of the old initiation rites from ancient times, and as such offers a timeless and lifelong guidance for all the years of a woman's life. It is our brush with the wild nature that drives us not to limit our conversations to humans, not to limit our most splendid movements to dance floors, nor our ears only to music made by human-made instruments, nor our eyes to taught beauty, nor our bodies to approved sensations, nor our minds to those things we all agree upon already. All these stories present the knife of insight, the flame of the passionate life, the breath to speak what one knows, the courage to stand what one sees without looking away, the fragrance of the wild soul. This is a book of women's stories held out as markers along the path. They are for you to read and contemplate in order to assist you toward your own natural one freedom. You're caring for self, you're caring for self, animals, earth, children, sisters, lovers, and men. I'll tell you right now, the doors to the world of the wild self are few but precious. Yes, Bindi, you are a truly wild self. If you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much you almost cannot bear it, that is a door. If you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door. The material in this book was chosen to embolden you. The work is offered as a fortification for those on their way, including those who toil in difficult inner landscapes, as well as those who toil in and for the world. We must strive to allow our souls to grow in their natural ways and to their natural depths. The wildish nature does not require a woman to be a certain color, a certain education, a certain lifestyle, or economic class. In fact, it cannot thrive in an atmosphere of enforced political correctness or by being bent into old, burnt-out paradigms. It thrives on fresh sight and self-integrity. It thrives on its own nature. So whether you are an introvert or extrovert, a woman-loving woman, a man-loving woman, or a God-loving woman, or all of the above, whether you are possessed of a simple heart of the ambitions of an Amazon, whether you are trying to make it to the top, or just to make it through tomorrow, whether you be spicy or somber, regal or roughshod, the wild woman belongs to you. She belongs to all women. To find her, it is necessary for women to return to their instinctive lives, their deepest knowing. So let us push on now and remember ourselves back to the wild soul. Let us sink her flesh back onto our bones, shed any false coats we have been given, don the true coat of powerful instinct and knowing, infiltrate the psychic lands that once belonged to us, unfurl the bandages, ready the medicine. Let us return now. Wild women howling, laughing, singing of the one who loves us so. For us the issue is simple. Without us, wild woman dies. Without wild woman, we die. Para vida, for true life, both must live. Thank you guys for joining me tonight on another episode. Should I call these episodes of Night Reads with Kali? I am yours truly, Kali, and I will see you in the next one.